Elvis pushed the door open with a deep sigh, setting his keys on the small table by the entrance. The house was unusually quiet, a silence that felt unsettling. He paused, listening for the usual sounds of his kids playing or dishes clattering in the kitchen, but he heard nothing. It felt as though the place had lost all its life. He walked down the hallway, his shoes tapping on the wooden floor, and turned the corner into the living room. He stopped in his tracks. His wife, Maria, was in the center of the room with her back to him, angrily shoving clothes into a large suitcase. The sight was so shocking that for a second he wondered if he was dreaming. "What is going on?" Elvis asked, his voice edged with confusion. Maria didn't flinch, continuing to pack with frantic, almost robotic movements. "I'm done, Elvis," she said coldly. "I'm sick of scraping by paycheck to paycheck with you. I found someone better. Someone with 12 inches, not your little 4. Elvis felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath him. "Maria, what are you talking about?" He stepped closer, trying to catch her eye, but she kept her gaze away, focusing on folding a dress with meticulous care. "What about the kids, Maria? What about our family?" His voice cracked with desperation. Maria finally looked up, her eyes cold and distant. "It's simple, Elvis. You're their father. You keep them. I'm done playing house with you. I want to enjoy my life." Elvis tried to respond, but before he could say anything, the roar of a powerful engine came from outside. He turned to the window just in time to see a sleek black SUV pulling into the driveway. The door swung open, and a man who looked like he just stepped out of a magazine, tall, sharply dressed, with a smug grin, strode to the front door without knocking. He pushed it open and walked in. "Hey, loser," he sneered, sizing Elvis up. "She's mine now, and you get to keep the kids. We don't want those little brats." Elvis's heart sank, his mind spinning as he tried to process the chaos unfolding in front of him. "Maria, are you serious?" he whispered. Before she could respond, the rapid footsteps of their 8-year-old daughter, Rose, echoed as she burst into the room, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. She glanced from her mother to the stranger in their home. "Mommy, what's happening? Where are you going?" she asked, her voice shaking. Maria barely glanced at her. "I'm leaving, Rose. You're staying here with your daddy." Tears welled in Rose's eyes as she ran to her mother, clinging to her leg. "Mommy, please don't go," she pleaded, her small hands gripping Maria's jeans tightly. Maria pulled her leg away, almost in disgust. "Let go, Rose. I have to go." Just then, their 15-year-old son, Jake, appeared in the doorway, his face pale and his eyes red from holding back tears. "Mom, please don't do this," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We need you. We're a family. You can't just leave us." Maria's expression remained unchanged as she grabbed another blouse to pack. "You'll be fine, Jake. You have your father. I need to think about myself for once." Elvis watched his children break before him, their pleas falling on deaf ears. Anger surged within him, hot and blinding, but he tried to keep his voice level. "Maria, if you leave with this jerk, don't think you can come crawling back when the fantasy fades. You're not welcome here, and the kids will never forgive you." For a brief moment, Maria hesitated, the dress she was holding frozen in midair. But the man behind her cleared his throat, and her resolve hardened. She zipped up the suitcase and shut it with a firm snap, then turned to face Elvis. "This is your problem now," she said, her voice flat and emotionless, as if she were talking about something trivial. She grabbed the handle and walked past Elvis without looking back, her lover following closely behind. The door slammed shut, the sound echoing through the unnervingly quiet house. Elvis stood frozen, his mind blank, until Rose's soft sobs pierced the silence. He knelt down and pulled his daughter into his arms. "It's okay, sweetheart. We're going to be fine," he whispered, though the words felt empty. Jake stood in the doorway, his fists clenched and his jaw tight. "Dad, what do we do now?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elvis looked at his son, feeling the heavy burden of their new reality. He wanted to say something reassuring, but the truth was, he had no answers. All he could do was hold Rose close, hoping they'd find a way to move on. The SUV's engine roared to life outside, and Elvis's chest tightened as he listened to the tires crunching on the gravel, taking Maria and her new partner away. Slowly, he stood up, taking a deep breath, and turned to his kids. "We're going to get through this," he said, mostly to himself. "We have to." Jake nodded, his eyes filled with a determined sadness. "We don't need her," he said, though his voice wavered a bit. "We'll be okay, Dad." Elvis forced a smile, ruffling Jake's hair. "Yeah, we will. But for now, let's just focus on getting through tonight." He led them into the kitchen and started preparing dinner. The familiar actions helped to steady his nerves. He tried to keep his mind on the task, but when he glanced at his kids sitting quietly at the table, the weight of what had happened pressed down on him like a heavy shroud. They ate in silence, the sound of clinking utensils the only noise in the house. Elvis couldn't shake the image of Maria walking out, nor could he silence the echo of her cold words. After dinner, he sent the kids to bed, promising they'd talk more in the morning. He remained at the table long after clearing the dishes, staring blankly at the wall. The house felt emptier than ever, as if Maria had taken more than just her belongings when she left. Eventually, he rose and made his way to the bedroom, his movements slow and deliberate. The bed felt too big, the quiet too overwhelming. He lay there, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep as the events of the evening replayed in his mind. Maria's departure felt like an emotional battlefield, and Elvis found himself stumbling through a fog, barely able to grasp the harsh new reality for him and his children. Every part of the house was a painful reminder of their broken life. Rose's forgotten toys, Jake's abandoned soccer cleats, the half-empty closet. Each item weighed heavily on Elvis as he struggled to find a path forward. Morning after morning, he forced himself out of bed, driven by his responsibility to his children, who needed him more than ever. He couldn't afford to fall apart, but every day felt like a battle against a relentless wave of despair. Rose was the first to show how deeply Maria's departure had affected her. Always a sensitive child, her sadness now ran deep, and every night, Elvis would hear her muffled cries through the thin walls of their home. "Daddy, where's Mommy? Why doesn't she want to be here with us?" she would ask, her voice frail, as he tucked her into bed. Each time, Elvis's heart broke a little more. "Mommy's gone for now, sweetie, but I'm here, and I always will be. We'll be okay, I promise." He would stroke her hair, trying to comfort her, but he could see the uncertainty in her eyes. As days turned into weeks, Rose's once bright smile faded, replaced by a constant look of sadness and confusion. She clung to Elvis, afraid to let him out of her sight, as if she feared he might leave too. Jake, on the other hand, responded with anger. His frustration burned inside him like an unquenchable fire. It consumed him, causing him to skip meals, lock himself in his room, and shut everyone out. When he did emerge, it was usually to slam doors, yell at his sister, or pick fights with Elvis over the smallest issues. "Why did she leave us, Dad? What did we do wrong?" he would shout, his fists clenched tightly, as if desperate to punch something. Anything, to ease his pain. Elvis saw the hurt behind Jake's anger, the pain his son was desperately trying to mask. He tried talking to Jake, but every attempt ended in shouting. "It's not your fault, Jake," Elvis would say, trying to reach out, but Jake wasn't ready to listen. "She doesn't care about us, Dad. She left because she didn't give a damn about our family," Jake yelled one evening, his voice hoarse from emotion, before storming out of the room, leaving Elvis standing there, feeling powerless and heartbroken for his son. Elvis realized he couldn't just wait for time to mend their wounds. He needed to actively show Jake and Rose that they could still be a family, even if it was different. He threw himself into his dual role as both mother and father with renewed determination. He started waking up earlier, making breakfast before school, and making sure he was there when they came home. He attended every parent-teacher conference and school event, even the ones Maria used to handle. He made it a point to be present at every soccer game, school play, and any moment that mattered to his children. At the same time, a simmering anger lingered in the back of Elvis's mind. He couldn't forget the image of Maria walking out, her lover grinning smugly as he took everything from him. The rage was always there, bubbling just beneath the surface, waiting to erupt. But Elvis kept it in check, focusing on his kids instead. One day they'll realize what they've done, he would think, gripping the steering wheel tightly as he drove to work. They can't just leave and think there won't be any consequences. One evening, after another tense meal where Jake barely spoke, Elvis decided it was time to address the elephant in the room. As they finished eating, Elvis looked across the table at Jake, who was listlessly pushing around what was left of his food. "Jake, we need to talk," Elvis said, his tone calm but firm. Jake glanced up, his eyes wary. "About what?" "About what's been going on. I know it's been hard since your mom left, and I know you're angry," Elvis began, carefully choosing his words. "But we're still a family, Jake. We have to stick together." Jake dropped his fork onto his plate with a loud clatter. "How, Dad? How are we supposed to be a family when she just walked out on us like we meant nothing to her?" Elvis leaned in, meeting Jake's eyes directly. "I don't have all the answers, Jake. I wish I did. But I know this. We are not nothing. We have each other, and that's something. It's everything." Jake looked away, his jaw clenched tightly. "It's not the same, Dad. It never will be." Elvis nodded, his voice heavy with honesty. "No, it won't be the same. But that doesn't mean we give up. We can't change what she did, but we can decide how we move forward. We'll get through this, Jake, together." For the first time in weeks, Jake's tough facade cracked, just slightly. He didn't say anything, but the tension in his shoulders eased a little, and Elvis took that as a small victory. After dinner, Jake retreated to his room, and Rose curled up on the couch with her favorite stuffed animal. Elvis sat in the living room, staring out the window into the darkening night. The pain was still there, raw and relentless, but so was his resolve to stay strong for his children. No matter what, thoughts of revenge continued to smolder, growing stronger with each passing day. Elvis knew he had to be careful, to think things through. The last thing he wanted was to act recklessly and cause his kids more pain. But he couldn't just let Maria and her lover walk away without consequences. "They'll pay for this," he thought to himself, his jaw tightening. "I'll make sure of it." In the days that followed, Elvis's determination only grew. He began to carefully set the stage for what he knew would be a long and deliberate process. He couldn't rush. He had to be patient and wait for the perfect opportunity. In the meantime, he focused on his children, rebuilding their lives and ensuring they felt loved and supported. But deep down, Elvis understood that this was just the start. The real battle was still ahead, and when it came, he would be prepared. He would prove to Maria and her lover that they had made the worst decision of their lives. Months passed, and while the sharp pain of betrayal dulled into a constant ache, it never completely faded. Elvis's once broken life was slowly coming back together. His children were adjusting to their new circumstances, but the wounds from their mother's departure were still fresh. Rose no longer asked about her mother as frequently, though the sadness in her eyes never fully went away. Jake, although no longer as furious, had grown more guarded and skeptical. Elvis noticed it all, and felt a deep sense of injustice. He knew he couldn't just let Maria and Greg walk away from the damage they had caused. They needed to face the consequences. Elvis had always been a methodical person. He handled his job, his duties, and now his revenge, with the same careful attention to detail. He started by gathering intel, knowing that he couldn't jump into this blindly. To make them pay, he needed to know everything about their new life. So, he hired a private investigator, a discreet and thorough professional. The investigator was Moray, a retired cop with a talent for digging up secrets. "Elvis, you're going to want to sit down for this," Moray said, handing Elvis a thick envelope packed with reports and photos. They were seated in a dimly lit bar corner, away from watchful eyes. Elvis opened the envelope, flipping through the pages, and the more he read, the tighter his grip on the papers became. Greg wasn't the successful businessman he pretended to be. His wealth was a fragile facade built on shady deals, fraudulent activities, and ties to unsavory individuals. The photos showed Greg in meetings with men who looked more like thugs than executives, and captured him going in and out of buildings linked to criminal probes Elvis had seen in the news. "His whole empire is a sham," Moray explained. "He's been skimming from his own businesses, laundering it through shell companies, and it's only a matter of time before it all collapses. But there's more. Your wife is caught up in it too. She's been spending like crazy, but it's all tainted money. If this falls apart, she's going down with him." Elvis felt a grim sense of satisfaction. Maria had abandoned him and their children for a fantasy, a life of luxury and ease, but that dream was on the brink of turning into a nightmare. "Thanks, Moray," Elvis said, standing up. "I'll handle it from here." With this newfound information, Elvis set his plan into motion. He knew he couldn't attack Greg directly. He had to be clever and subtle. The first move was to sow seeds of doubt within Greg's business network. Elvis began anonymously sending tips to Greg's clients and investors, highlighting suspicious practices in his business. He executed this carefully, ensuring the tips came from different sources to avoid any trail leading back to him. It didn't take long for the effects to surface. Greg's investors started withdrawing, one by one, and deals that had been in progress for months suddenly collapsed. Rumors spread rapidly within the business world, and soon Greg's empire began to fall apart. Elvis watched from a distance, feeling a cold satisfaction as Greg's life unraveled while he quietly rebuilt his own. Elvis poured himself into his work with renewed vigor, staying late, taking on new projects, and forging connections that would boost his career. His hard work paid off. He earned a promotion along with a substantial raise. But it wasn't just about the financial gain. Elvis wanted to show himself and his children that they could rise above the betrayal. He wanted Maria to see the man she had left behind, successful, respected, and stronger than ever. As Elvis's career thrived, he also began to focus on his personal life. For a long time, he had closed himself off from the idea of love, too hurt and too focused on his children to consider a fresh start. But as the months went by, he realized he didn't want to spend his life alone. He deserved happiness just as much as his kids did. At a company event, Elvis met Lisa, a colleague from another department. She was smart, kind, and had a warm smile that seemed to thaw the ice around his heart. They started talking casually at first, but soon their conversations became more frequent, evolving from work discussions to sharing personal stories. Lisa was a single mother, and she understood the struggles Elvis had faced. There was no need to explain the pain of betrayal. She had endured her own hardships. One evening, after a long dinner conversation, Elvis realized he was falling for her. The thought scared him, opening up after all he had been through. But Lisa made it easy. She was patient, understanding, and genuinely cared for him and his children. When Elvis finally introduced Lisa to Jake and Rose, he was anxious, uncertain of how they would react. To his relief, they quickly warmed to her. Lisa didn't try to take their mother's place. She simply wanted to be there for them. She listened to Rose's stories, helped Jake with his homework, and soon her presence brought back the warmth that had been missing in the house. The change was noticeable, and the once constant tension began to fade. Elvis couldn't help but feel that they were finally moving in the right direction. However, he knew his plan wasn't finished. The final step was ensuring Maria realized what she had lost. As Greg's business continued to crumble, Maria's life fell apart with it. Through mutual acquaintances, Elvis heard that she was starting to panic. The luxurious life she had chosen over her family was slipping away, and she had nowhere to turn. Greg had grown distant, their relationship strained by the growing financial pressures. Before long, Elvis received the news he had been waiting for. Greg had abandoned her, leaving her alone, broke, and with no place to go. Maria had finally hit rock bottom. But Elvis wasn't finished. He made sure word reached her about his success and the life he had built without her. He wanted her to know that he and the kids were thriving, that they had moved on, and that she was the one who had been left behind. One day, as Elvis sat in his office, his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was Maria, asking to meet. Elvis stared at the message for a long time before replying. He agreed to see her, but he already knew how it would end. When they finally met, Elvis could hardly recognize her. The confident, glamorous woman who had walked out on him months ago was gone. In Maria's place stood a woman who appeared exhausted and desperate. She tried to apologize and justify her actions, but Elvis had no interest in her excuses. He had already moved on. "I'm not here to talk about the past," Elvis said, interrupting her. "I'm here to tell you that it's over. I've rebuilt my life, and I found someone who truly cares about me and the kids. You made your choice, Maria, and now you have to live with it." As Elvis walked away from that meeting, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had done what was necessary, not just for himself, but for his children. They had endured the worst but had come out stronger, and now they could finally leave the past behind and look forward to a brighter future. While Elvis's life flourished with newfound happiness and success, Maria's world was rapidly falling apart. Greg, the man she had left her family for, had become cold, resentful, and increasingly angry as his business empire collapsed around him. The luxury SUV that once symbolized her upgraded life was repossessed, and the expensive clothes she had once worn proudly were now just reminders of a dream that was slipping away. Each day, Maria felt the harsh grip of reality tightening, squeezing the life out of the illusion she had pursued. It started with small things. Dinners that were once at the city's finest restaurants turned into cheap takeout from low-cost places. Weekend getaways were replaced by long nights at home, where Greg would drink in silence, staring blankly at the TV without speaking a word to her. Then the calls from creditors began. Greg would answer, his face twisting with rage as he yelled about failed deals and investors pulling out. Maria would retreat to the bedroom, clutching a pillow, hoping the nightmare would end. But it only got worse. One evening, the tension finally boiled over. Greg stormed into their apartment, his face contorted with fury. "This is all your fault," he shouted, throwing his jacket to the floor. "Ever since you came into my life, everything's gone downhill. I should have never left everything for you." Maria, who had been sitting on the couch, looked up, stunned. "What are you talking about, Greg? We're in this together, aren't we?" "Together?" Greg sneered, his eyes narrowing with disdain. "You were just a fun distraction, a toy. But now you're nothing but bad luck. Everything I touch turns to dust, and it's because of you." His voice grew louder with each word, and Maria felt the sting of his accusation like a physical blow. "Greg, please," she pleaded, standing to face him. "We can work through this, we can." "No, just shut up," he snapped, shaking his head. "I'm done. I'm done with you and this mess. I found someone else. Someone younger. Someone who doesn't bring disaster wherever she goes. I'm leaving, Maria. You're on your own." With that, Greg turned away and began packing his things. Maria stood frozen, her mind reeling, struggling to comprehend what was happening. This couldn't be real. He couldn't be leaving her after everything she had sacrificed. But as she watched him toss his belongings into a suitcase, reality set in. The man she had abandoned her family for, who had promised her a life of luxury and happiness, was walking out without a second thought. "Greg, please don't do this," Maria begged, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I have nowhere else to go, please." But Greg ignored her, zipping up his suitcase and heading for the door. "You'll figure something out," he muttered, not even glancing back as he walked out. The door slammed shut behind him, leaving Maria alone in the now empty apartment. The silence that followed was overwhelming. Maria collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably as the reality of her losses sank in. In the days that followed, her life continued to spiral into despair. She tried reaching out to friends, but no one responded. She had burned too many bridges and was now facing the consequences. The apartment, once a symbol of her fresh start, now felt like a prison, with the walls closing in on her, suffocating her under the weight of her mistakes. Desperate, and with nowhere else to go, Maria made a decision she once thought unimaginable. She would return to Elvis and the family she had left behind. Surely they would welcome her back. She was their mother, after all. She believed they couldn't possibly turn her away. She planned to apologize, beg for forgiveness, and maybe, just maybe, reclaim some of what she had thrown away. With shaking hands, Maria knocked on the door of the house that was once her home. The sound echoed through the quiet suburban neighborhood, each knock a painful reminder of everything she had lost. After what felt like an eternity, the door finally opened, but it wasn't Elvis who stood before her. It was a woman with a warm smile and kind eyes, looking at Maria with a mix of curiosity and sympathy. "Can I help you?" the woman asked gently. Maria's heart sank. She knew who this woman was, Elvis's new partner, the one who had taken her place. "I need to speak to Elvis," Maria stammered, her voice breaking. "Please, it's important." The woman hesitated briefly before stepping aside. "Come in," she said, her tone still kind. Maria entered the house, her eyes scanning the room. The living room was filled with pictures of Elvis, the kids, and this woman. They looked happy and at peace, a stark contrast to Maria's own life. It was like stepping into a world that had moved on without her. Elvis appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable as he looked at Maria standing in his home. "What do you want, Maria?" he asked, his voice cold and distant. Tears filled Maria's eyes as she fell to her knees. "I made a mistake, Elvis. Please forgive me. Let me come back. I miss you and the kids. I was wrong." Elvis stared at her, his face hardening as memories of the pain she had caused flooded back. He thought of the nights he stayed up comforting Rose, the anger he saw in Jake's eyes, and the way Maria had laughed as she walked out the door. "You made your choice, Maria," he said, his voice firm and unyielding. "You wanted a life without us, and now you have it. You're not welcome here anymore." Maria's sobs echoed through the room, but Elvis's heart had hardened. He had moved on, rebuilt his life, and wasn't about to let her back in. Lisa stepped forward, resting a gentle hand on Maria's shoulder. "It's time to go," she said softly. Maria looked up, her vision blurred with tears, seeing the life she had once taken for granted, the warmth, love, and stability. And she knew it was gone forever. As she was gently guided out of the house, the door closed behind her with a finality that resonated deeply in her soul. Standing on the porch, Maria realized she had lost everything: her family, her home, and the man who had once loved her. The life she had destroyed for a fleeting fantasy was now just a distant memory, leaving her with nothing but regret. 12 years passed, and the life Elvis once knew had completely changed. The house that once echoed with the pain of betrayal now buzzed with laughter, love, and the joy of a family that had risen from the ashes. Elvis had become a respected and successful figure in his industry, a man who had rebuilt his life piece by piece. His children, Jake and Rose, had grown into remarkable young adults. Jake, once a teenager overwhelmed by anger and confusion, had transformed that energy into building his own business empire. At 27, he was already a thriving entrepreneur, celebrated for his creative ideas and relentless ambition. His recent wedding had been a joyous celebration of love, resilience, and fresh beginnings, attended by friends and family who had watched his remarkable journey unfold. Rose, who had been just a young girl when her mother left, had grown into a self-assured and determined young woman. She was excelling in college, on track to fulfill her long-held dream of becoming a doctor. Her compassion and drive were evident in everything she did, qualities she had inherited from her father, who had been her pillar of strength during the darkest moments. The scars left by Maria's betrayal, though still present, had healed long ago, serving as reminders of the strength they found in one another and the life they built together. The toxic shadow of the past had no place in the home they had created, a home filled with warmth, support, and unconditional love. One evening, Elvis and Lisa, along with Jake, Rose, and their closest friends, attended a charity gala in the city. The ballroom was elegantly decorated, hosting an event that celebrated community leaders and philanthropists, with Elvis now a respected figure in his community among the honorees. As they mingled, exchanging greetings and catching up with familiar faces, Elvis felt a deep pride, not just in his career achievements, but in the family he had nurtured and the life they had all worked tirelessly to build. Lisa, who had brought so much stability and love into their lives, held his hand, their fingers intertwined, a quiet testament to their unbreakable bond. But then, across the room, Elvis's gaze landed on a figure he hadn't expected to see. It was Maria, standing alone, looking frail and weary. Her once radiant beauty had faded, worn down by years of hardship and regret. Her clothes were worn, her hair had lost its shine, and the confidence she once exuded was nowhere to be seen. She appeared as a mere shadow of the woman she had once been, clearly bearing the marks of a life that had not been kind. Maria's eyes met Elvis's, and for a brief moment, everything seemed to stand still. She took a hesitant step forward, her eyes pleading, as if searching for a trace of the life she had lost. But Elvis's expression remained calm and detached, showing no anger or sadness, only indifference. As Maria slowly made her way closer, Elvis turned his attention back to his family, gently guiding Lisa and the children toward a group of friends, deliberately steering them away from Maria's path. His actions were subtle, almost unnoticed by anyone but Maria, who stood still, watching as the people she once called her family moved farther away from her. The group settled at a table with old friends, and soon the air was filled with laughter and the warmth of shared memories. Elvis and Lisa were engrossed in a conversation about their upcoming vacation plans, while Jake and Rose eagerly discussed their latest achievements with the group, their faces glowing with pride and excitement. It was a moment of complete contentment, one that Maria, standing on the sidelines, could only watch from afar. Maria's eyes welled with tears as she observed them, the joy on their faces, the love they shared. It was achingly familiar yet completely unreachable. She had made her choice years ago, and now the consequences of that choice were painfully clear. The family she had once taken for granted had moved on, grown stronger, and found happiness without her, while she, in her desperate search for a better life, had ended up with nothing. Tears streamed down Maria's face, and she quickly turned away, not wanting anyone to see her in such a vulnerable state. She moved to the edge of the room, away from the laughter and brightness, finding a quiet spot where she could be alone with her regrets. She stood by a large window, gazing out into the night, her faint reflection merging with the city lights that twinkled in the distance, a stark contrast to the darkness that had overtaken her life. Meanwhile, Elvis's night continued without pause. He was fully immersed in the moment, surrounded by his family and friends. The memories of the past were pushed far to the back of his mind. He no longer felt compelled to dwell on what had been. His life had become a testament to strength and perseverance, a life rebuilt on love, surrounded by those who truly mattered. As the evening came to an end, the group decided to leave the event together, stepping out into the crisp night air. They walked toward their cars, still talking and laughing, the night marking the success in more ways than one. Holding Lisa's hand, Elvis felt a profound sense of peace. The pain of his past was finally behind him, and the future was full of promise. Maria watched from afar, standing in the shadows as they departed. She was alone, forgotten by the very people she had once turned her back on, left to confront the harsh truth of the choices she had made. The life she had ruined for a momentary fantasy was now just a distant memory, a painful reminder of what might have been. As Elvis and his family drove away, the world moved on without Maria, leaving her behind in the quiet solitude of her regrets. She had lost everything: her family, her home, and the man who had once loved her deeply. Now, all she had left was the cold comfort of loneliness as her only companion. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.